I'm sorry for my video cutting off early, on that one video I had posted earlier, so I'm gonna do a part two and finish up the rest of the part of the video. Now, we were talking about Trump's Klan rally that he had held, at Youngstown. Now, even by Trump standards, the Youngstown speech was a vile example of fascist propaganda and political theater. Now, Trump's inbred audience loved it, and those outside Trump world on the right-wing echo chamber found it understandably revolting, which I would have found it revolting too. But looking the other way, it's not an appropriate reaction. The mainstream media are supposed to be the guardians of democracy, and they do not have the luxury of ignoring this gathering darkness. But too many journalists and media outlets are doing exactly this. What is particularly lacking is any sustained narrative that clearly and consistently explains to the American public how Trump and the repug fascists pose an existential danger to their democracy, their society, and their literal personal safety. Now, some media outlets have even preemptively surrendered to Trumpism, leaning into an obsolete and dangerous habits and norms of fairness and balance in a time of ascending fascism. An example of the type of incisive truth-telling that is rarely featured by the American mainstream news media, Anthea Butler, who's author of the book White Evangelical Racism, provided critically important context for Trump's speech in a series of Twitter posts, which I don't use Twitter anymore because they fucked me over on that. Basically, she says, yes, it's fucking creepy and fucking weird, but take it with all the other Klan rallies going on. The Reawaken America tour with General Flynn, the Charlie Kirk revivals in Arizona, and with the Repug candidates, and you have a major faction of the Repug party morphing into what we call Repug religion. Yes, it's fucking fascism, but it is also bringing elements of conspiracy theory, QAnon, alongside evangelical Christianity to blend into a movement with charismatic figures, who people can latch onto and imagine themselves as part of the end times and saving that nation. One of the most dangerous things about it is that this all empowers regular people to believe their special part in a movement that can change the world morally. We don't talk about the effective part of how feelings of belonging make for powerful motivators religiously. These Klan rallies, especially the Trump ones, have effectively blended religious fervor and they call for violence, and fake patriotism into a noxious stew. As Trump's Youngstown Klan rally made clear, he has come ever closer to fully embracing the anti-Semitism, QAnon conspiracy theory, and its claim that the world is run by a secret cabal of Democrats, Hollywood celebrities, globalists, and other elites who gain power by kidnapping, torturing, and killing children, which isn't true. Now, within this deranged and befouled fantasy universe, a coming storm will destroy all such evil, meaning that Trump or some other Christian fascist overlord will preside over an orgy of violence that will cleanse society. After that, the QAnon faithful and other real Americans will be left to rule. In a new op-ed for MSNBC, Shazan Alim discusses the already infamous movement, or the infamous moment when many of Trump's sycophants saluted him with the QAnon-linked hand signal that was known that Hitler had did. Now, conservative politics in America have typically been irrepressibly individualistic and libertarian in any outlook. Alim writes, but the emphasis on unity implied by the QAnon movement, and it can be a sign that that's a changing. Now, it might seem strange that Trump would pander to a crowd that has already formed an actual cult around him. Sure, psychology speaking, Trump will never turn down an opportunity to bask in the warmth of people who hate who basically pretend to love him. But why repeatedly hold them closer at a time when this man, when his main electoral obstacle is appealing to people beyond his diehards? It's because this isn't about winning by democratic means. It seems likely that Trump recognizes that QAnon events represent his best bet at forming a militant vanguard for his ever-increasing authoritarian political movement. Now, dozens of QAnon sycophants have already committed acts or attempted acts of vigilante and domestic violence, and they were the key people at the January 6th Klan insurrection, and that they're at the center of a new kind of politically infused spirituality that blends proto-fascist thinking. But in keeping up with his long-term deployment of stochastic terrorism, as well as increasingly overt incitements to violence, Trump continues to threaten President Biden, Attorney General Merrick Garland, and the Department of Justice and the FBI and other law enforcement agencies if they dare to continue investigating him over his stolen classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago, or for his many other crimes that he committed. As Wajahat Ali writes at the Daily Beast, the language of the hate-filled violence that was favored by leading Democrats in the mainstream media, it only serves to cloud the issue, since the threat of violence is primarily coming from one single source. As incestuous maggots that were promoted by the GOP and right-wing media, they have increasingly threatened law enforcement, Democrats, educators, poll watchers, doctors, Republicans who don't support Trump, and anyone and every institution that stands in the way of their white Christian nationalist utopia. Earlier this week, a guy named Igor Lannis, a 53-year-old Trump sycophant in Michigan, murdered his wife and badly injured one of his children. He in turn was killed after firing his shotgun at the police. His daughter Rebecca Lannis told the Daily Beast that her father's embrace of the QAnon conspiracy theory was a very big contributor into what happened. She said that he was once an extremely loving father with no history of violence, but all that changed after Trump lost in 2020. According to Lannis, her father latched onto the big lie and started going down crazy rabbit holes, which eventually radicalized him and culminated in bloodshed. A quick recap of it. A domestic terror threat is being amplified by the former squatter of the United States, who is the figurehead of the GOP, a party that is currently supporting and championing extremist candidates and working with pundits who promote hateful conspiracies that have radicalized individuals into harassing, intimidating, and threatening violence. And one would think that these revelations, in light of the recent violence, would be leading the news cycle. However, since Trump is a racist white man and the criminal suspects aren't Muslim, there is no war on terror. Instead, some media outlets are bending over backward to court the Republican viewers and criticize the President Biden for speaking in front of U.S. Marines, like Republicans and Democratic presidents have done many times over. And the lesson is that it's too good to be a white maggot extremist. Now, these apparently isolated instances of violence are leading indicators for a larger national trend. The United States feels like it's about to combust. Unfortunately, that is not just an intuition. It's a very description of the facts of the ground, where law enforcement and other experts continue to warn that the country is on the precipice of a sustained right-wing insurgency, or perhaps even a second civil war. Now, Andy Campbell, who's the author of the new book "We Are the Proud Boys," issued this recent warning in the New York Times op-ed. I really do believe that going forward, it's not just about going to maggot Klan rallies. It's not just going to be political violence at Proud Boy Klan rallies, or Democrat rallies, or Black Lives Matter events. It's going to be political violence at any civic event that happens to fall in the crosshairs of Donald Trump and his company. Now, new research by the Anti-Defamation League finds that the Oath Keepers, the right-wing paramilitary group that played a key role in Trump's coup attempt and the Capitol attack on January 6, has tens of thousands of members across the country, including hundreds of law enforcement and military personnel. The mainstream American news media and other public voices have consistently relied on a narrative frame that represents Trumpism and the Republican fascist movement as something anomalous, new, and almost incomprehensible. And it may attract eyeballs, but it certainly does not reflect reality. The Republican fascists, the conservatives, and larger the right wing and the white right are following a well-known playbook and model, and here are the elements based off of it. In a recent New York Times Future, David Leonhardt highlights the important long-term role played by a range of institutional actors in creating our crisis democracy and the rise of the right-wing populism, fascism, and authoritarianism. He observed that about two-thirds of Republican voters and nearly half of all Republican candidates running for statewide office this year, they refused to accept that the 2020 presidential election was legitimate. Now, up to 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Trump in 2021, eight have either decided to retire or they have lost their primary election. Political scientist Stephen Levitsky, who's co-author of the 2018 book How Democracies Die, had told Lionheart, by any indication, the Republican Party upper level, mid-level, and grassroots in a party that can only be described as not being committed to democracy, adding that he was significantly more concerned about American democracy than when the book was first published. Lionheart continues about this. Juan Jose Linz, who's a political scientist who died back in 2013, had coined the term semi-loyal actors to describe political officials who typically do not initiate attacks on democratic rules or institutions, but also they do not attempt to stop these attacks. Now through their complicity, these semi-loyal actors can cause a party and a country to slide towards authoritarianism. That's what happened that's what happened to Europe in the 1930s and in Latin America back in the 60s and 70s. More recently, it has happened in Hungary, and now there are similar signs in the United States. Often when Republicans who cast themselves as different from Mr. Trump include winking references to his conspiracy theories in their campaign, saying that they too believe in election integrity and a major problem. Now, Governor Glenn Youngkin of Virginia and the Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, for example, have both recently campaigned on behalf of being election deniers. Now, in Congress, Republican leaders have largely stopped criticizing the violent Klan attack on the Capitol from last year. The right-wing propaganda machine's ability to basically spread disinformation, lies, and other distortions has no rival among the Democrats and other mainstream political actors in America. This machine was decades in the making. Now, research by the Washington Post on how the big lie spread throughout social media identifies a powerful generation of online influencers that emerged as a direct result of Trump's claim of election fraud. Since the 2020 election, that small group of super spreaders has begun to shape the national debate on other subjects, including transgender rights and the panic over critical race theory. Now, once they gained a level of influence, they can continue to leverage that influence going forward. This is what Kate Starbird had said. Now, by tracking follower accounts on Twitter and Facebook, the Post found that this group rose steeply in popularity in the 6 months before the January 6th Klan insurrection, gaining a stunning 25 million followers on the platform. Of the 77 figures, 57 remain active on Twitter, and to gauge their ongoing influence since January 6th, the Post measured their follower counts on Twitter, Facebook, and other social media platforms, along with shares and retweets of posts containing misinformation on an array of topics that have shaped the national conversation since the 2020 election. Now, the analysis found that the massive megaphones built by posting about election fraud have given the 57 an outsized role in pushing over false and a divisive narrative. Political scientist Evan Perkowski, who's an expert on political violence, offered additional context in an interview with UConn. Evaluating the current security environment, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and others have repeatedly stated that the radicalized Republicans pose a threat to the U.S. and the Constitution. This is evident in the number of attacks and in the scale of those attacks. But to be clear, this is not the typical right side of the political spectrum. It's the extremists who are using and threatening violence to get what they want, and it's white supremacists, the proud pricks, people who marched in Charlottesville with torches, and those who stormed who instigated the Klan attack on the January 6th. Now, we have seen a rising tide and violent threats against government officials, like the attempt to kidnap the Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and the death threats against former Vice Governor Pence on after the Klan attack on January 6th. This is a pretty standard operational profile for the alt-right. Now, in the recent New Yorker article, Susan Glasser, co-author with her husband Peter Baker of the Divider, Trump in the White House, going from the years 2017 to 2021, they used a metaphor to describe Donald Trump, comparing him to the cunning velociraptors from Jurassic Park. I am thinking, in particular, of a chilling conversation I had with a former senior national security official who regularly observed Trump in the Oval Office. The official compared him to the velociraptors in the movie Jurassic Park. So, no offense, Jurassic Park, and no offense, velociraptors, but the horror movie monsters who proved capable of learning while hunting their prey. It's a terrifying fact that the audience learns when one of the predators chases a child into a kitchen by turning the handle to open the door. The man who finished his squatting with a total of 30,573 lies is not going to suddenly return to power as a truth teller. He will seek vengeance and vindication. He will turn the same plays again and again. He will find aides and advisors who will do his bidding, unlike the faithless traitors who surrounded him before. The Velociraptor will have learned to open the door. Now Peter Wellner, Peter Wenner, who's a former official in the George W. Bush administration, writes in a new essay for The Atlantic that he fully expected Trump to act recklessly and lawlessly without empathy, as he lived in a world devoid of moral rules, but not necessarily to turn a personal tragedy into a national calamity. Trump imprinted his moral pathologies and his will to power ethic on the Republican Party. It is the most important political development of the century. Now, the Republican officials showed fealty to Trump despite his lying and dehumanizing rhetoric. Now, therapeutic language is very helpful for properly understanding America's democracy and the crisis in the rising fascist tide of movement. American society has a worsening illness, but it has not yet decided that it wants to get better. Absent such a decision, the desperate epiphany, often described as hitting bottom, the sickness will continue to get worse, and the unanswered question is, how long will we have before the illness becomes terminal? And the intervention is critical, but that never works if the patient refuses treatment. So if you like the video, you can give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King. You can also hit the notification bell so you'll be notified when a new video comes out. And if you want to support my work even further, you can donate to my Patreon link, which you can find in the About section of YouTube. And for just a little as a few bucks a month, your donation can help go a long way, and thanks for listening.